Zach, I've been thinking a lot about something lately, and I feel like it's one of those topics everyone experiences, but no one really talks about honestly. I'm talking about peer pressure. It sounds like a big, scary term, but when you really break it down, it shows up in everyday life way more than we realize. Do you remember the first time you actually felt peer pressure? Like that moment when you knew you were doing something not because you wanted to, but because everyone else was doing it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that question hits close to home. I think the first time I truly felt peer pressure was back in high school. And honestly, it wasn't even about anything dramatic. It was something small, like pretending to like a certain kind of music just so I wouldn't feel left out. I remember thinking, why am I nodding my head like I love this song when I don't even know the lyrics? But at the same time, I didn't want to be the odd one out. Looking back, that's when I realized peer pressure isn't always about someone forcing you to do something bad. Sometimes it's silent, subtle, and kind of sneaky.
Exactly. And I love that you said sneaky because that's the perfect word for it. A lot of people think peer pressure is someone literally saying, come on, do this or you're not cool. But most of the time, it's way quieter than that. It's more like an invisible push. So, if we had to explain peer pressure in really simple terms, like explaining it to a friend over coffee, how would you define it?
I'd probably say peer pressure is that feeling you get when you change your behavior, your choices, or even your opinions just to fit in with people around you. It's when you feel pulled, directly or indirectly, to act a certain way because of your friends, coworkers, classmates, or a social circle. No one might say a word, but you still feel that pressure in your chest, like, if I don't do this, I won't belong. It's less about what's right or wrong and more about wanting acceptance.
That's such a clear way to put it. Wanting acceptance is such a human thing. We're social creatures, after all. We want to feel seen, included, and valued. And sometimes that desire makes us bend ourselves into shapes that don't really feel comfortable. I think that's why peer pressure doesn't stop after school. People think it's a teen problem, but honestly, adults deal with it all the time too, just in different outfits.
Oh, 100%. Peer pressure just grows up with us. When you're a kid, it might be about clothes or hobbies. When you're an adult, it turns into pressure about careers, money, relationships, marriage, or even how fast you should be winning at life. Suddenly, it's like everyone around you is getting promoted, getting married, buying houses, and you're sitting there thinking, am I behind? Am I doing something wrong? That's peer pressure wearing a suit and tie.
That comparison is way too real. And what makes it even trickier is that peer pressure isn't always negative. Sometimes it pushes people to study harder, exercise more, or aim higher. But before we get into that, let's talk about the different types of pressure, because I think that helps people recognize what they're actually dealing with. From your experience, what kinds of pressure do you think exist?
I'd break it down into a few main types. First, there's direct peer pressure, which is the obvious one. That's when someone straight up tells you to do something, like, just try it, or don't be boring, or everyone's doing it. It's out in the open, and you can feel it immediately. Then there's indirect peer pressure, which is more subtle. Nobody says anything, but you notice what everyone else is doing, and you start adjusting yourself to match them, almost without realizing it.
Yes, that indirect kind is the one that really messes with your head. It's like you wake up one day and realize you've been living on autopilot. You didn't consciously decide anything, you just followed the crowd. What other types would you add?
Another big one is spoken pressure versus unspoken pressure. Spoken pressure is when people comment on your choices like, why aren't you drinking? Or, you're still single? Unspoken pressure is when no one says a thing, but you scroll through social media and suddenly feel like your life isn't measuring up. That comparison game can be brutal. It's like running a race you never signed up for.
Social media pressure deserves its own episode, honestly. You see highlight reels all day long, and your brain starts playing tricks on you. You forget that people are only showing the best 5% of their lives. Suddenly, you're questioning your progress, your decisions, even your worth. And then there's also positive versus negative pressure, right?
Right, negative peer pressure is what most people think of first. It's pressure that pushes you towards things that don't align with your values or could harm you, like unhealthy habits or risky decisions. Positive peer pressure, on the other hand, is when being around motivated, supportive people inspires you to be better. The tricky part is recognizing which one you're dealing with in the moment, because when you're emotionally involved, everything feels blurred.
That's such an important point. When you're in the middle of it, logic often takes a back seat. Feelings are loud. And that brings us to another big question. How do you actually know when peer pressure is affecting you? What are the signs? Because I think a lot of people feel off but can't quite name why.
Yeah, the signs aren't always obvious. One of the biggest red flags for me is when you start doing things and later think, that didn't feel like me. If you constantly feel uncomfortable, anxious, or drained after hanging out with certain people, that's your gut talking. Another sign is when you're afraid to say what you really think. If you're biting your tongue all the time just to keep the peace, that's pressure at work.
That fear of speaking up is huge. It's like walking on eggshells, always worried you'll say the wrong thing. I also think another sign is overthinking your choices way too much. Instead of asking, what do I want, you ask, what will they think? And before you know it, their opinions are running the show.
Exactly. And let's not forget the physical signs. Stress shows up in your body. Trouble sleeping, feeling tense, that tight feeling in your stomach, those are clues too. Your body often notices peer pressure before your brain does. If you feel like you're constantly trying to keep up or prove something, that's exhausting, and exhaustion is a warning sign.
I love that you brought up exhaustion because people underestimate how tiring it is to be someone you're not. It takes so much energy. And sometimes peer pressure shows up as guilt. You feel guilty for saying no, guilty for choosing differently, guilty for not matching other people's timelines. That guilt isn't random, it usually comes from external expectations.
Yeah, guilt is a big one. It's like an emotional leash. And the scary part is, the longer you ignore these signs, the easier it becomes to lose touch with yourself. You start confusing what you actually want with what you think you should want. That's when peer pressure stops being just uncomfortable and starts affecting your identity.
That's such a powerful way to put it. Identity is fragile, especially when you're still figuring yourself out. And honestly, even adults are still figuring themselves out. There's no finish line where peer pressure suddenly disappears. It just changes shape. The key, I think, is awareness, being able to pause and say, wait, is this my voice or someone else's?
Awareness really is the first step. Once you can name peer pressure, it loses some of its power. It's like turning on the lights in a dark room. The fear doesn't magically disappear, but at least you can see what you're dealing with. And that awareness sets the stage for the next big question. Okay, now that we understand peer pressure, how do we actually handle it without burning bridges or feeling like we're fighting the whole world?
Exactly. Understanding is just the beginning. The real challenge is learning how to respond in a healthy way, how to protect your values, and maybe even use that pressure as fuel instead of letting it crush you. And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, that's where things get real. Because understanding peer pressure is one thing, but actually dealing with it in the moment is a whole different ballgame. It's easy to talk about values when you're calm and sitting at home, but when you're surrounded by people, emotions are high, and you don't want to disappoint anyone, suddenly your confidence can shrink really fast. So let me ask you this, Lucy. When you feel pressure rising, what's the hardest part for you personally?
Honestly, the hardest part is saying no without feeling like I'm being rude, selfish, or dramatic. I used to think that saying no automatically made me a difficult person, like I'd over-explain myself, add a million excuses, or even laugh it off just to soften the blow. It took me a long time to realize that no is a complete sentence, even if it feels uncomfortable at first.
That hits home for me, too. I used to treat no like a dirty word. I thought if I said no, people would stop liking me or think I wasn't fun anymore. But over time, I learned that constantly saying yes when you mean no is a fast track to burnout. You end up exhausted, resentful, and honestly a little mad at yourself. The power of no isn't about pushing people away, it's about protecting your energy.
Exactly. And I think people forget that boundaries aren't walls, they're filters. They help you decide what gets your time and what doesn't. Saying no doesn't mean you don't care, it just means you care about yourself too. And the funny thing is, the people who truly respect you usually respect your no as well. It's often the wrong people who make you feel guilty about it.
That's such a good point.
I've noticed that when I started setting boundaries, some people drifted away, and at first that really hurt. But then I realized something important. Anyone who only likes you when you're easy to control isn't really on your team. Real friends don't pressure you to cross your own lines. They might not always agree with you, but they won't try to bulldoze your values.
And that naturally leads into another huge part of handling peer pressure, choosing your circle wisely. The people you surround yourself with have a massive influence on how you think, how you act, and even how you see yourself. There's that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and honestly, it's not that far from the truth.
Yeah, your environment really shapes you. If you're constantly around people who complain, judge others, or chase things that don't align with your values, it's only a matter of time before that mindset rubs off on you. On the flip side, being around people who support growth, honesty, and self-respect can push you to become a better version of yourself without forcing anything.
I love that you said without forcing anything, because healthy influence feels different. It doesn't feel heavy or stressful, it feels inspiring. You don't feel like you have to keep up, you feel like you want to step up. That's how you know you're experiencing positive peer pressure instead of the toxic kind.
Absolutely. Positive peer pressure is when someone's discipline motivates you to work harder, or their kindness reminds you to be more patient. It's when your friends celebrate your progress instead of competing with you. I've had moments where just being around the right people made me want to make better choices, not because I was scared of judgment, but because I felt encouraged.
Same here. I remember hanging out with a group of friends who were really focused on personal growth, reading, learning new skills, taking care of their mental health. No one ever told me I had to do those things, but being around that energy made me think, hey, maybe I want that for myself too. That's the kind of pressure that lifts you up instead of weighing you down.
And the cool thing is, once you experience positive peer pressure, your tolerance for negative pressure drops. You start noticing red flags faster. You realize when a situation doesn't sit right with you. And instead of blaming yourself for feeling uncomfortable, you trust that feeling and take it seriously.
Trusting your gut is such an underrated skill. Your intuition is basically your internal compass. It doesn't always shout, but it whispers. And when peer pressure is pushing you in the wrong direction, that whisper turns into discomfort, anxiety, or even self-doubt. Learning to listen to that voice is part of growing up, and honestly, part of self-respect.
Totally. And I think another important strategy is reframing pressure instead of fighting it. Pressure doesn't always have to be the enemy. Sometimes it's information. It shows you what matters to you and where your boundaries are. If you feel pressure around a certain topic, it's worth asking yourself, why does this bother me so much? That question can be incredibly revealing.
That's such a mature way to look at it. Instead of reacting emotionally, you pause and reflect. And sometimes you realize the pressure is actually pointing you towards growth. Maybe it's pushing you out of your comfort zone in a healthy way. The key difference is choice. When you choose to step up, it's empowering. When you're forced, it's draining.
Exactly. Turning peer pressure into motivation means flipping the script. Instead of asking, how do I avoid this? You ask, how can I use this in a way that serves me? If everyone around you is improving their skills, maybe that's a sign to invest in yourself too, not to compete, but to grow at your own pace.
And your pace is so important. Comparison can be useful, but only if it inspires you, not if it makes you feel small. Life isn't a race, even though social media makes it look like one. Everyone has different starting points, different struggles, and different timelines. When you truly accept that, peer pressure loses a lot of its power.
Yeah, once you stop measuring your life against other people's highlight reels, things feel lighter. You focus more on progress than perfection, and you realize that saying no, choosing your circle, and leaning into positive pressure aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of emotional intelligence.
I couldn't agree more. If I had to give one final piece of advice to anyone dealing with peer pressure, it would be this. Know yourself before the world tries to define you. The clearer you are about your values, the harder it is for outside pressure to knock you off course.
That's such a solid takeaway. I'd add this. You don't need everyone to approve of your choices. You just need to be able to live with them. At the end of the day, you're the one who has to wake up with your decisions, not your friends, not society, not the internet.
Exactly. And growth doesn't always look impressive from the outside. Sometimes it looks like quiet decisions, small boundaries, and choosing peace over approval. Those choices may not get applause, but they build a strong foundation.
And that foundation matters. Because when you're grounded in who you are, peer pressure stops controlling you and starts becoming background noise. You hear it, but it doesn't run your life. And honestly, that kind of freedom, that's priceless.
Couldn't have said it better. Peer pressure will always exist, but how you respond to it is where your power lies. And once you realize that, you stop trying to fit in everywhere and start belonging to yourself first.
And that, right there, is where real confidence begins.